Hello and welcome to the second in our series, 10 Crucial Convictions, a study in the book of Job. Job is a book about what life can throw at you. And we all are going to get good and bad things in our lives. But it's also a book that allows us to ask questions. Why? Why me? Why this? Why now? We're allowed to ask those questions. But hidden away in the book of Job are 10 wonderful beliefs that if I hold, I will be able to live life with courage and victory. And surely that's what it's all about. And so we move on today. We're going to do 5 crucial convictions, moving with some speed. Job chapter 2, verse 3 to 5. Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." Satan replied, "Stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face." So the Lord said to Satan, "Very well then, he is in your hands, but you must spare his life." And so we have the scene in heaven, a scene of tremendous confrontation. Satan taunting God, God standing up against him. There is a spiritual warfare going on of massive proportions. We might say, God is almighty, why doesn't he just win it? That simply indicates how little we know. This is a warfare of cosmic proportions. God will win it, but in the meantime, there is a spiritual warfare going on. Crucial conviction number 3, there are things going on in heavenly places of which we are totally unaware. The whole book of Revelation is about that, a picture of this tremendous spiritual warfare. Now, there is a corollary to this one, and it reads, your struggle may be part of the spiritual warfare, and your keeping the faith may be winning victory in heavenly realms. In the ministry, it was my task to visit sometimes people in old age homes, people feeling very alone, not able to get to church, not able to get out, not being visited much. And they would say, "I feel so useless. And I'm not even strong enough to kind of be a prayer warrior," which some people tell them they should be. "I just feel useless." Or cancer patients who are near the end, but it's taking a long time and they never get out. And they sometimes say, "I feel useless." Well, I often would say to them, be careful of saying you're useless, because the book of Job tells us that just by keeping your faith in the midst of all the struggle, you are serving a purpose in the kingdom of God. And so you can have a meaning no matter what's happening in your life. Viktor Frankl, the famous Jew who was part of the terrible horror of the concentration camps during the Second World War, was one of those who survived. And while he was in the concentration camps, he actually made a study of why some died and some didn't, and yet they were in the same circumstances. And he came to the conclusion, those who had a sense of purpose and a sense of meaning survived. Those who lost it didn't survive. And so he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, in which he basically said, without meaning, life fritters away. With meaning, you can survive anything. He made this statement, life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by lack of meaning and purpose. And so your suffering, just by keeping the faith, just by staying cheerful, you may be serving a bigger purpose than you will ever imagine. Job chapter 7, verse 2. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and afflicted Job with painful sores. Then Job took a piece of broken pottery and scraped himself with it as he sat among the ashes. This picture of Job sitting on the ash heap, scraping pus out of his sores, is kind of the primal picture of suffering. Many artists have attempted it. I've put a picture on the screen of one piece of artwork that depicts the great suffering. And there is Job, this good man, suffering these terrible things. That leads us to crucial conviction number 4. Bad things happen to good people. We may not like it. We may argue with God and say, why do you allow it? The fact is they happen. Here's a picture of my wedding day 45 years ago. And I'm not sure I appreciate your laughter. Age does it to all of us. But there's our wedding picture. Over there is Wendy's best friend Jenny with her gorgeous auburn hair, now our grandmother living in New Zealand. And there's my friend Brian. Now, Brian contracted brain cancer at the age of 35, and he died by the age of 37, leaving behind 2 beautiful children, too young to remember him, and a lovely wife. You might ask why. We will look at that question in the next session. But the issue is, he was a good man, a very good man, and yet these things happened to him. I'm going to say a little bit more about Brian later on. But the truth is that bad things happen to good people. Job chapter 2, verse 25, Job says, "What I feared has come upon me." That leads us to crucial conviction number 5. Fears can be self-fulfilling. We need to be careful of our fear life. Now, fear to an extent is a healthy thing. If I don't fear certain things, there's something wrong with me. Here's a picture of me with my grandchildren on my 70th birthday, and those who know me well know I'm never happier than when I've got my grandchildren all over me. This is 4 of the 6 of them. 2 of them live in England. We went through 5 grandsons before we finally got a granddaughter. There she is. The other day I was babysitting the granddaughter, and she went to sleep, and a thunderstorm came up. Next thing I hear her calling, "Grandpa, Grandpa." I go through to the room, pick her up and say, "What's the trouble?" And she says, "It's too scary for thunder." And I picked her up and put her on my chest and lay on the bed, and she went to sleep, and I loved it. Now that is fine for a 3-year-old to be afraid of a thunderstorm, no problem. But we do need to be careful of our fears. You see, what Job has revealed here is that he has been fearing all along, even when everything was going totally well. He's been afraid he will lose it. Every time his children have a dinner party, he ends up having a sacrifice for them in case they have sinned. He's fearful of his health, of his wealth, of his children. And Satan sees those fears and he hones in on them. And so it wasn't for nothing that is the things that happened to Job. Be careful. Fears can be self-fulfilling. We move on. Job chapter 3, verse 1. After this, Job opened his mouth and said, "Cursed be the day that I was born." Job has hit the bottom of the valley. I wish I were dead. You can get there. It's a terrible thing to get there. And so Job gets there, and then for chapters, he expresses his grief and his anger and his confusion. And so, crucial conviction number 6, grief and perplexity are part of life and need to be expressed. Job has very good reason to be depressed. He's lost his health, he's lost his children, he's lost his wealth. All he's got left is his own life and his wife. And then his wife doesn't support him. I can't help feeling that might have been the hardest thing of all. And she says, "Curse God and die." I still think the best movie I've ever seen is A Man for All Seasons with Thomas More, played by Paul Scofield. Wonderful movie. There's a very heartrending scene in that movie where Paul Scofield is taking leave in the Tower of London from his wife and his daughter. His daughter understands why he's doing what he's doing, but his wife will not understand, and it causes him tremendous pain. It's the only point in the movie at which he breaks down in tears. And so depression. Depression is a real thing. Depression is normal. We should feel depression every time we lose something. But the length of the depression should be proportionate to what we've lost. So when a child's balloon pops, well, for a minute perhaps they should grieve that, and you should help them to grieve that, then they must move on. If my wife comes and tells me that she's dinged my new car half an hour, it's only a car. My wife is fine. I've got an insurance policy. I'm lucky enough to have a car. Half an hour. I once preached this in Westville Baptist Church at the early service, and then between the 2 services, my wife came up to me and said, "Andrew, I've got something to tell you." And I had half an hour to get over it. A woman who loses a child a year before you expect her to smile again. It's in proportion to what you've lost if you're healthy. If you lose self-esteem, that could take a long time, and it's appropriate to feel depression for that. And the Bible says to us, go ahead and grieve. It needs to be felt. God gave us in the middle of the Bible a prayer book, and this prayer book, the longest book in the Bible, is to show us how to pray. I did a study in the Psalms a little while ago, and I took to writing down in the margin next to every verse if the verse was positive or negative. I put the word negative in inverted commas because it isn't negative to express grief or confusion or whatever it is you're feeling. That's not negative. Anyway, I wrote these down, and do you know what I came up with? 36% of the book of Psalms, of the verses in the book of Psalms, are expressing negative emotions. 36%. In Psalm 1 to 90, it rises to a staggering 44%. Nearly every second verse is expressing negative emotion. That's a colossal amount. And God is saying, this is my prayer book. This is how I want you to pray. If that's what you're feeling, tell it to me. I can take it. I can handle it. Interestingly, the last 60, the negative verses dropped to 21%. A very low percentage. Those last 60 are full of praise. They're lovely psalms. And perhaps that's a good sort of lesson for life. There are times when you go through very heavy times, and then your talking and your prayers will be full of negative emotion. But maybe generally for life, it would be good if we aimed at kind of that 80% positive. I think people like us when we're positive. If you have a criticism to make, praise a person 4 times before you make the criticism. That's a pretty good value for life. But there it is. Negative emotion is real and needs to be expressed. Now, the Psalms give us a couple of wonderful examples. I love Psalm 58. Verse 6 says, break their teeth in their mouth, O God. Isn't that lovely? When you're feeling really angry with someone, you say to God, note, you say it to God, not to them yet, break their teeth in their mouth. Now, when you go out there, you might not actually break their teeth, and that's part of how we keep from sinning, by expressing it to God and reflecting on it with God. Verse 58, verse 8 is my favorite of all. Let them be like a slug which melts away as it goes on. Oh, God. Smear them like slime on the sidewalk. You know, this is the Holy Bible. This is God saying it's okay to talk like that because we will have negative emotion. It's a twisted view of the Christian life that has no place for lament. There were no shortcuts for Jesus in Gethsemane. So what happens if I do have friends going through these terrible times? How do I support them? Well, Job's friends start quite well. We read in verse 13, chapter 2, so his friends sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his grief was very great. Job's friends start really well. They just sit with him 7 days and 7 nights. I've never done anything like that. I've once sat right through a night. That's about the best I ever did. Wonderful start. They've done really well. There's something great in just sitting with someone, not necessarily saying anything. I had in my church once an elder, an Indian man, and his father died. It was a Friday when it was my day off, and I went down in the late afternoon thinking I'll just pray a little prayer and then I'll go home. When I got there, I was very surprised to find there was a great big tent already set up in the front garden with plastic chairs they'd hired, and it was full of people, all Indian. Some of them were Buddhist, some of them were Hindu, some of them were Muslim, some of them were Christian, and they were just sitting. They weren't particularly talking to the family, they were just sitting. And I felt quite uncomfortable. What do I do now? You know, it's not part of my culture. I actually stayed for about 2 hours and just sat. It was a good experience. But there was a culture that learned the value of just sitting and not necessarily speaking. The Quakers have a rather nice saying, speak if you can improve on the silence. I like that. Unfortunately, Job's friends don't keep it up. And they start to speak, and they start to speak of which they do not know. If you have a friend in the depth of depression, if you've never been there, I'm really glad for you. But if you've never been there, you don't understand it. If you say to them, snap out of it, that is just an indication of how little you understand. Gerard Manley Hopkins, the Roman Catholic priest and poet, wrote a poem in which he described the depths of the human mind. Oh, the mind has mountains, cliffs of fall, frightful, sheer, no man fathomed. Hold them cheap, may, who ne'er hung there. The mind is no man fathomed, and we must never presume to understand for someone else. But you, if you're ever in those positions, are invited to share it with God. Well, we end today on a wonderful positive note. In the depth of all this, although Job expresses his grief, he comes out with some absolute gems. Some of the most famous sentences in the world. You probably know them off by heart. Chapter 19, verse 25. I know that my Redeemer liveth, and that he will stand at the latter day upon the earth. Whatever else is going on, I know God is still there, still real, and is my Redeemer. There's a wonderful faith in that. Crucial conviction number 7. People with faith can withstand tremendous trials. It's been my privilege down the years to minister to many dying people. You might find it strange, but I need to say that one of the most uplifting experiences in my whole ministry has been ministering to the dying, because I have seen often firsthand how Christian people can face terrible trials, including the final trial, with great heroism and faith. It's been a great joy and building up in my life. Job chapter 1, verse 21, he said, the Lord has given, the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Now you can say those words kind of in fatalism, or you can say them with great faith. Matt Redman has turned that into a wonderful modern song. Blessed be the name of the Lord. He gives and takes away. My heart will choose to say, blessed be your name. Job chapter 13, verse 15, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. Coming back to my friend Brian, he had an operation, they opened him up and they just closed him up again and they said, we're sorry, there's nothing more we can do. You may get a couple of months. In fact, he got 6 weeks. In those 6 weeks, Brian managed to say something to virtually every one of us that we carry with us. The sentence he said to me is, Andrew, I've learned that you can die in the real world. And that's been really important to me down the years. Ronald Adams, a friend of ours, went in those last days, and Brian said to Ronald, though he slay me, yet will I love him. People with faith can withstand tremendous trials, even children, or perhaps I should say especially children. Children with leukemia and terrible things, it's amazing how they keep their faith. Often they keep their parents' faith intact. There was a little girl dying of leukemia, lying in the hospital ward, and the night sister came to tuck her in and saw that the little girl was quite afraid. So she said to her, if you just look up in that corner over there, and you look really carefully, you may see angels are here looking after you. And if it gets really bad, just put up your hand, and Jesus will come and help you. Well, the sister tucked the little girl in and went off about her duties, and other things happened so that she forgot about her for some time. And when she went back to her, the little girl had died. And there she was lying in her bed. But the little girl had taken some pillows and tucked them around her arms so it wouldn't fall down. And there was the little hand. And assuredly Jesus came to help her. People with faith can withstand tremendous trials.